All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time. That is a real quote from a real doctor, and he was not talking about a farm. Sit with it for a second. A field, a crop, something you plant and harvest and own. The man who said it wasn't a fringe lunatic hiding from the law. He was a celebrated dermatologist at the University of Pennsylvania, the kind of name that got published, got cited, and got very rich. He was the man your doctor's doctor looked up to. And the field he was looking at, those acres of skin, those were people, men, hundreds of them, lined up inside a prison in northeast Philadelphia, and he genuinely did not see them as men. He saw farmland. He saw a crop he was lucky to have found. For 23 years, from 1951 to 1974, Dr. Albert Kligman ran experiments on the bodies of inmates at Holmesburg Prison. It started with soap, it ended with poison, and most of those men were never told what was being rubbed into their skin in the first place. They trusted the white coat and the famous name behind it, and that trust was the only thing he ever really needed from them. So how does a respected university professor end up farming human beings in the open with a contract and a paycheck for over 2 decades and never once try to hide it? Who let him? And why couldn't a single one of those men just say no? The answer starts with who he was allowed to use. Here's the part that should bother you. The men in Holmesburg weren't all criminals. A lot of them hadn't been convicted of anything at all. They were just too poor to make bail, so they sat in a cell waiting for a court date, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. And inside, there was exactly one way to get money. Not for a lawyer to fight your way out, not for the commissary, not to send a few dollars home to your kids. The only way to earn a single dollar was to volunteer for the tests. So Kligman would walk the cell blocks, and to him, it was almost too easy. A captive population. Broke, bored, desperate, and reachable. That's the fertile field he was talking about. He didn't have to convince anyone, because the poverty did the convincing for him. The men would line up to have patches taped to their backs, ointments worked into their arms for a few dollars a session. On paper they were willing, paid volunteers. In reality, they were broke men being offered cash they desperately needed by the institution holding them. That is not consent, that is leverage. And most of them had no real idea what was in those patches or what it might do to them years down the line. Willing and informed are not the same word. You can agree to something you were never even allowed to understand. So what was he actually putting on them? The answer is where this stops feeling like science and starts feeling like a crime. In the beginning, it was almost laughable. Foot powder, deodorant, shampoo, skin cream. Holmesburg basically became a free testing lab for the consumer industry, and the clients had names you know. Companies like Johnson & Johnson sent products to be tried out on prisoners before they ever touched a store shelf. Think about that the next time you read the words dermatologist tested. But soap doesn't pay like soap, so the work climbed, from cosmetics to experimental drugs, then to dioxin, to radioactive isotopes, to live infectious agents, to mind-altering chemicals. Holmesburg became the single busiest human testing site in the entire country, with hundreds of men under test at once. A whole prison turned into one enormous laboratory. There's a line one survivor remembered hearing when somebody asked whether a test was safe. The answer was, yeah, not for you, but we'll be fine. That's the whole arrangement in one sentence. The risk was yours, the reward was theirs. And the grim logic underneath all of it is what made people's skin crawl when they first heard it. A prisoner was cheaper than a lab animal. You didn't have to house a beagle, feed it, or justify it to anyone. The men were already there, already owned by the system, already a few dollars away from saying yes. Human beings, used because they were cheaper than animals and easier to get. So Kligman had his field, and now he had buyers lining up. The only question left was how far a buyer could push it. In 1966, Dow Chemical wanted to know how much dioxin human skin could take before it reacted. Dioxin, one of the poisons that would later show up in Agent Orange. Dow paid Kligman around $10,000 and gave him a clear instruction. Use tiny amounts, a few micrograms, no more. Kligman did not use a few micrograms. He applied roughly 7,500 micrograms to about 75 inmates. That is 486 times the dose he was told to use. Not a rounding error, 486 times. The chemical company that hired him to poison people was the one that got alarmed at how much he was poisoning them. The inmates, meanwhile, were paid a few dollars to wear it. Most had no idea it was dioxin, no idea it was anywhere near Agent Orange, no idea they had agreed to anything more than a patch on the skin for a bit of commissary money. The skin broke out in lasting lesions, blackheads, and blisters that wouldn't heal. and it didn't stop when they walked out of that prison. Decades later, survivors described chronic nerve conditions, failing eyesight, some of them foaming at the mouth. For a few dollars in commissary money, they were poisoned with the same family of chemical that scarred a generation of soldiers. They were paid to be poisoned, and nobody ever told them that's what the deal really was. And somehow, this still wasn't the strangest thing happening in that prison. Because out in the yard, the United States Army had parked a row of trailers. Inside those trailers, the US Army was running its own tests on the inmates, and reportedly, the CIA was tied to it too. Not skin cream this time. Mind-altering chemical warfare drugs, psychotropics, the kind of thing people mean when they say Manchurian Candidate, where you try to take a man's mind apart just to see what's left of him. If you've watched our Unit 731 video, you already feel the shape of this. The state deciding that some people exist to be opened up and studied, as long as those people are the ones nobody is coming to protect. Now follow the money out the other side, because this is where it really stings. In 1967, in the middle of all of this, Kligman patented a compound called Retin-A, the acne and wrinkle treatment, and licensed it to Johnson & Johnson. It hit shelves by 1971, and it became one of the most famous skincare ingredients in the world. He got wealthy, he got famous, he got a legacy, and companies still profit today from work that traces straight back to that prison. The men whose skin built it got a few dollars and a lifetime of damage. The experiments only shut down in 1974, once informed consent rules finally tightened and made it illegal to treat a prison like a field. So after 23 years, hundreds of victims, and a fortune made off their backs, surely somebody finally had to pay for it. So who did? Who went to prison? Nobody. Nobody was punished. Not the doctor, not the companies, not the prison, not the university. The truth got out in 1998 when a writer named Alan Hornblum published a book called Acres of Skin, taking that farmer's quote and turning it back on the man who said it. In the year 2000, around 298 former inmates sued. The case was thrown out, not because it wasn't true, but on the statute of limitations. The clock had run out, the same time it took for the damage to surface. Philadelphia and the College of Physicians finally apologized in 2022. By then, most of the men were already dead. They apologized to ghosts. You want this to be the story of one monster, but that's the comfortable lie. Kligman wasn't hiding. The prison opened its gates. The companies wrote the checks. The army parked in the yard. The university kept his name in lights. The line between an experiment and a crime was never the dioxin, or the dose, or the lie about the patch. Do it to a free man, and it's assault. Do it to a poor man who couldn't make bail, and for 23 years, they called it science. Those men weren't a fertile field. They had names and kids and a phone call home they were trying to pay for. That's the part worth remembering. Not the doctor, them.